Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Centre for Behavior Analysis at Queen's University, Belfast, for our 2024 webinar series. We are delighted to have Dr. Paulie Gavoni here this evening. And I'm just going to give you a brief introduction to Paulie, and then he will speak for about an hour or so, and we'll have some questions. And any questions you might have, just type them into the question section. He might ask you some questions as well, and we will come to the questions at the end of the talk. So Paul is a USA-based behavior analyst passionate about applying organizational behavior management, or OBM, strategies to lead and help other leaders establish positive and engaging environments across industries to bring out the best in people. Beyond his work in education and human services, Paul is a former Golden Gloves champion and highly respected striking coach in combat sports. Coach Paulie Gloves, as he is known in the mixed martial arts community, has trained world champions and UFC vets using technologies rooted in ABA. He's a Wall Street Journal and USA Today best-selling author, co-host of this Crisis in Education podcast, and hosts his own show on iHeartRadio entitled Thoughts and Rants of a Behavior Scientist. He's also an active board member of the Opioid Awareness Foundation and the World Behavior Analysis Day Alliance. The World Behavior Analysis Day is, of course, in next month, which we probably all know. So I'm absolutely delighted to welcome Paul here today to give us to share his wisdom with us. And I'll leave it over to you, Paul.
Oh, well, thank you. Thanks for that introduction. And Carola, thank you for the invite. I'm honored and I'm humbled. I'm always am. Truly, I can tell you that one of my greatest values in my mission in life feels like is to disseminate the science of human behavior, to help people, to help themselves, and to help others through the science. I think this is the greatest science in the world. For making a positive difference. Case in point, what science can improve other sciences by helping to improve the performance of the respective scientists, right? So I just love
absolutely
behavior analysis, and so I'm happy to talk about it. So
okay,
by the way, I want to let you know I have 3 screens here. So if you see me looking up, I'm not like staring into space. That's one of my screens I'm looking at, and I'm looking at all your messages coming in to the side. I'm going to try to I'll probably ask some questions, and I'll have you guys drop in some responses down there, just because I like to engage you guys. If you see there's a QR code there, I'm going to have that QR code come up a few times. That's an accident. I screwed up and put the wrong QR code in there. That QR code was supposed to be for you guys to be able to connect with me. I just put a link in the bottom here. That has access to all my social media stuff. It has access to my podcasts and newsletters. It has access to all my books. Things that I'll be talking about today are all grounded in my book that just came out. This Positional Authority Ain't Leadership. But you don't need to buy any books. There's lots of free stuff in there. So please do connect with me on there. Before I get rolling, I want to talk about how I got into organizational behavior management. It was accidental, just the same way I got into behavior analysis. How I got into behavior analysis was that I had, when I started working, I was a social worker. I had gotten my bachelor's and my master's in social work, and because I really love to help people. And I wish I could say that it was altruistic, and I found out that there's a science of helping people, and that's why I pursued it. But the fact was, I was broke, and somebody said, "Hey, if you go take this course over here, it's, that you can get paid $50 an hour." I'm like, "Oh, great, man. $50 an hour. I could barely put gas in my car." So I went and took it. And man, it was like, it just opened my eyes so wide. And it was kind of the way I thought the world worked. And it was just the greatest thing that happened to me. And I went on to start working in schools as a behavior analyst, and I didn't know what the heck I was doing. I remember I had this green, I think it was the Dunlap book, and I was trying to figure out how to do functional behavior assessments, and I was writing behavior plans that were probably the size of a small book. That they looked beautiful. There were all sorts of beautiful graphs from the FBA, but I don't think anybody was going to follow them because they were just too big. Besides, they had a whole bunch of things that they needed to do anyhow. And they didn't even have tier 1 approaches working in their classrooms or in the schools. And if they're not engaging in those behaviors associated with tier 1, they're certainly not going to follow a plan that's going to ask them to do a whole bunch of things more, less, or differently, right? That's more challenging. So that's why I like to focus on tier 1. Well, in one of the schools that I was at, I was asked to go in and support a special ed classroom, just coming there once a week. And I remember the first day that I came into that school, there were just a number of students running up and down the hallway. Staff, there was just a handful of staff around, and usually they're walking from point A to point B, but there was nobody like posted up in places. And I thought that was pretty unusual. It's about 3 months in the school year. Like, how are there not going to be any staff? It's an elementary school. Kids getting off the bus, it was a safety issue. Kids were getting overly aroused, and they were coming into the classroom. And, there were just all sorts of challenges happening there. And so at the end of that year, the school actually went from an A to an F, if you can imagine that, an A to an F. They had 792 suspensions. They were getting upwards of 50 calls to remove a kid from the classroom every day. And, the school only had less than 600 students in it. I remember teachers crying, not coming out of the classroom at the end of the day. The bell would ring and they wouldn't even dismiss the kids. Kids would just run to the bus. So it was a mess. And at the end of that school year, the deputy superintendent came to me and said, hey, Paulie, we're gonna try to turn this school around next year. Do you think you can help us out? And I don't think he came to me because he thought I was some great behavior analyst. Quite the opposite. I was the crisis management trainer, and I think he wanted just a big guy, and he probably knew I was a fighter, and there was a lot of dangerous behavior going there. And he wanted me to be there, probably to restrain kids, and that's the last thing I want to do. I don't want to restrain kids. I will as a last resort. And believe me, there were a lot of fights, and I had to intervene a bunch just on the days that I was there. And so I accepted it, even though I didn't believe in myself. I did, and I've always believed in the science of human behavior. So I went to a colleague and I said, hey, these folks, this school and the teachers in it and the administrators have been trained in school-wide positive behavior supports. Type a yes in here if you've heard of school-wide positive behavior supports or positive behavior intervention and supports. Type a yes in there. And if you haven't heard of it, put a no in there for me. Okay, good. All right, we got a lot of yeses coming down. Okay, all right. Well, so you guys are familiar with this. So I said to my colleague, like, hey, it seems like we need school-wide positive behavior supports for the adults, right? Because if we're going to bring out the best in the students, don't we need to bring out the best in the teachers? Doesn't that make sense, right? And if we're going to bring out the best in the teachers, don't we have to bring out the best in the principals? And it kind of goes up the chain. And somebody says, well, there is something like that. It's called Organizational Behavior Management. They handed me a book by Dr. Aubrey Daniels, and coincidentally, that's one of the required readings in my coursework at Endicott, where I teach OBM courses. And I read it, and you know what I found? That it's just behavior analysis. It's nothing was new in it. And so the next year, the first week of school, and I remember the whole arrival time was a mess. I thought, what am I going to do? Because this is a school with 40 plus teachers and all these classrooms, and there was a lot of things that needed to change, and I really didn't know where to start. So selfishly, not because I read any research or thought this is the approach that I need to do, I thought, well, I can't do all that stuff, but maybe I can do something with the arrival time. Maybe I can get that right. And I did. I did simple things, like I brought the staff in, and I explained why this time was important and why it was important for them, and how there was, if they weren't at their post, that it was going to be a challenge for them because students were coming to class more aroused and it's starting the day off on the wrong foot. I gave them a couple of key behaviors to engage in, like greeting the kids, asking them how their morning was, giving behavior specific praise for walking on the right side of the breezeway. And if they were running, having them stop and walk back. Don't just say walk, have them stop and walk back. And when they walk back by you, by the way, that was a punisher. You thank them for walking and say, have a great day. Very simple. And at the end of the arrival time, I would pump out some data and I say, hey, thank you so much for being at your post because you were there engaging A, B, and C. We had a 36% reduction in office discipline referrals this morning. Great job. So I helped them I helped make the outcomes of their behavior salient. Now they could see for themselves that things were shaping up. And this miraculous thing kind of happened. Besides me believing in myself, right? I'm like, oh, I can actually make a change. They began to believe in themselves. They could believe they can engage in these behaviors, what Albert Bandura calls self-efficacy. They believe that if they engage in these behaviors, that they can produce this outcome, which he called response efficacy. And they value that outcome, right? And so I just replicated that whole thing that was just grounded in, behavior analysis. It's kind of like organizational behavioral momentum, which I called quick wins. I ended up writing a book about it called Quick Wins. And we did it in the cafeteria, another common area. We did it during dismissal time. And the school slowly started to shape up, and we started to think about that school like an organism that we had to shape the behaviors up, right? And at the end of the year, the school, it didn't go all the way back to an A. The school was so far behind, but it went from an F to a D, almost a C. But we went from 792 suspensions to 67 at the end of the year. We went from more than 50 or up to 50 codes a day, that's calls for removal from the classroom, down to 3 a week, right? So amazing outcomes, just engaging a few practical approaches grounded in behavior analysis. And so that's how I began to really believe in organizational behavior management. And it gave me, more belief in the science of human behavior, because I'm like, gosh, if we can change all of these behaviors, because that's what had to happen, right? To reduce the number of restraints that we were engaging in, to reduce all these suspensions that we had, to improve student achievement, man, we really had to change the behavior of the adults first. And if you are working in any classroom, we need to think about the classroom as a small little organization, right? A business. That teacher is very much like the CEO. Those students are very much like employees, and there's all these processes and routines that they need to engage in, and they're all collectively trying to produce this business result that we call student achievement, right? And so if you are working in any sort of classroom or school, of course of the school, but in the classroom as well, it behooves you to have some knowledge about organizational behavior management, because almost always, when you are getting behavior change through the behavior of others, trying to get results through the behavior of others, you are now in the realm of OBM. And almost always, if we're going to get sustainable change, behavior change on the part of a student, we need to change the behavior of the adults, right? Because we need to fade out. Does that make sense? Would you guys agree with that? Type a yes if you agree with it. Type a no and be like, no, that's bunk. You're wrong. Yeah. So lots of yes, thumbs up. Great. Yeah. And this is why it's so incredibly important that we understand the concepts of OBM, which is just behavior analysis. But the mind shift is looking at student behavior as a result, right? This is a result. And it's the behavior of the adults that we eventually need to change, right? To create sustainable change in the students, right? Behavior and results. And this was the mind shift that I had to have, right? Not just looking at behavior, the student behavior, right? Their behavior is now a result. So powerful. So let me, as I began thinking about the science a little bit more, I took my thoughts about it on the road. I started thinking about the science at organizational levels. I also started thinking about it through the work I was doing with fighters. I am a former fighter, a professional mixed martial arts coach, and I'm very proud to say that through the science, not me, through the science, we've helped to create local, state, national, and even world champions. Helped to increase safety, reduce injury, really helping people learn. And so it's taking me all over the world. Most of these guys are fighters they're actually losing, and they came to me and through some practical application of the science, helped to turn them around. This guy in particular here, do you guys see this guy here? This is Kenny Deuce Garner, and Kenny is my heavyweight champion of the world. And when he first came to me, he's 1-2 as a fighter, and we went on a 9-0 streak, captured the heavyweight title of the world. And I'm just off this picture, just outside of here, and this is Russia. Can you guys see who this guy is right there? Type if you recognize who that guy is. Nobody? Yeah, that's right. That's Putin, right? So Deuce, after just beating one of Putin's guys, yells over to the crowd where Putin's sitting, right, to the front row, says, "Yo, Putin, come here." Now, first of all, who does that to arguably one of the most powerful, people in the world, right? Yo, Deuce, or yo, Putin, come here, right? So Putin gets up and comes over to the side, and that's Deuce telling Putin, "Yo, throw up your deuces," right? Because Deuce would have everybody do that. Now, what's that have to do with the story? Absolutely nothing, man. But I think it's freaking cool that my guy, through the science, right? Like the Bionic Man was beating all his guys. So I took this on the road, right? And of course, and now not just with fighters, but I've done it across organizations, behavior analytic organizations, through schools, sort of the school turnaround team, and written all about it. I have, like I said, I have hundreds of articles online. Not academic. I'm not an academic guy. I've done research, but I'm not that guy. I'm a disseminator. I like to talk in practical terms. I like to inspire people to want to use the science. I want to get them to adopt it, behavioral principles. And again, I want them to reflect on their behavior and the outcomes they're producing. This is OBM. So today I want to talk to you about a couple of key things. I want to take a light look. Again, I like to keep things very simple. We might think about it as like there's inter and intra disseminators, right? Intra disseminating between the fields and inter disseminating within the field. And I believe that we also need to disseminate in the field because there's a lot of things that we don't know. I'm always learning. I'm always, thank God there are academics that do the research for us, because without the research, we wouldn't be where we are at. But the academics, can't be everything to everybody. They're not always the best storytellers. They're not always the best in engaging people. They're great, and I can't do the work that they can do, but their work fuels the rest of our work, right? But I like to take what they've done and make it practical. And so my talk is all going to be very practical, because I feel that the more practical it is, the more likely you're going to be able to digest the concept. And I want you guys, once you kind of have a want for it, once you kind of get some global understanding, and once you pair it with your existing knowledge, because that's what I'm going to try to do, I want you to dive in more deeply, right? So my goal today, a lot of people say, the objectives are you will be able to do this, you will be able to do that. You can read those, right? I don't know that what you're going to be able to do anything, because being able to do stuff requires instruction, it requires, modeling and rehearsal with feedback, right? Some basic behavior skills training. But my goal for you really is to give you a shift in mindset, to start reflecting on your own behavior, and to begin maybe looking into some of the research that's out there, some of the books, whatever it is, to start informing your practice a little bit better, to start equipping yourself with some organizational behavior management. But I will be doing it through these general topics, right? Systems analysis, performance engineering, and leadership. Does that sound all right to you guys? And how am I doing so far? Is this okay? I know nobody's gonna be like, "Oh, you suck," right? But you can send me a private message, be like, "Bro, dude, do something different." All right. So thank you guys. All right. So let's begin the shift. Now, we're all behavior analysts here, and we all look at behavior through the ABCs, right? It's very important to look at behavior through the ABCs. I mean, this is really what the 4-term contingency is, and that's the 3-term contingency, but the 4-term will add in the MOs, is to behavior is what E equals MC squared is to the universe. It's the why explains why we do things, and it's so important. It's amazing. It's the greatest discovery the world has ever known in the last couple 100 centuries, I think. Of course, I'm a behavior nerd, and a lot of you guys are as well. But one of the issues is that we tend to look at the ABCs of the immediate environment, and I think we really need to think about zooming out, right? And so I tend to take, instead of a molecular look, and we have to have a molecular look at things, I tend to take a molar look, right? And so when we're looking at the ABCs in the environment, we need to look at the other ABCs going on, right? What we call these meta contingencies, right? These interlocking behaviors, or these interlocking if-thens. And if we don't do that, if we try to make the change in the immediate environment, there's a good chance we're not going to get sustainability, because if we all agree to bring out the best in the student, we have to bring out the best in the teacher. Well, how are we bringing out the best in the teacher, and what are those people doing, right? And we can go up the chain. I'm going to give you some visuals for that. So what's important when we're looking at, and when we are zooming out, is that we're looking at it through a systems lens. Now, I want to keep systems very simple and very practical, right? This is an important story. I want you to think about it. I think telling stories and using metaphors is incredibly important for helping people to understand some detailed concepts, right? And so I want you to think about what it would like. Imagine that wherever you are at, that if there were car accidents happening every day, right? And there's cops out, and they're giving people tickets, and they're sending them back to driving school to reteach them how to drive. Some, they're suspending their license, even a few, because it's happened so many times. They're actually sending them to jail, right? It's been so bad, right? But then when you zoom out, if you take a look, you zoomed out, you're like, wait a second. There's no rules of the road. There's no lines in the road. There's no green light, yellow light, red light. There's no stop signs. There's none of these things in the environment that tell your behavior what to do, right? That generate rule governed behavior and that bring your behavior under stimulus control. If that was the case, would it make sense for the cop to be engaging in all those behaviors, right? And we're trying to shape up the behaviors of those individuals who are getting in accidents, or would it make sense to shape up the system? Go ahead and drop that in there, right? Are we going to focus on the 100,000 people, or are we going to focus on getting the system right so the system brings their behavior under stimulus control? Yeah, the system wins every time, right? It does. And in the classroom, there are systems, right? In the school, there are systems where we put the boundaries on it. But here's the thing, right? People think, well, systems, I'm a behavior analyst. Systems aren't something I think about. But you know what? Guess what? Systems will help to keep people on track, meaning it keeps their behavior on track. Systems are going to make your job easier, whether it's a system of your consulting, whether it's the tier 1 system in the classroom, the tier 1 system at the school, right? Systems will make your job easier, right? But they should be deliberately designed to deliver positive reinforcement across a chain of performance. Now, if you think about the system of driving, there's a lot of reinforcement going on there, but one of the things that's getting you to where you're going, quickly, efficiently, safely, right? So those are all sorts of reinforcements tied in there. But we want to make sure that in an organization, in the classroom, that we're deliberately designing our systems to get a value-added behavior in touch with positive reinforcement, right? So we have to consider this stuff. And unfortunately, too often we just think about training as how we're going to change behavior. Now, at the beginning, that first slide, I had a QR code for the PDC, but we'll get to that. But remember that training is an antecedent strategy, right? When we think about antecedents, if you're working with students, you tend to think about it as discriminative stimulus that, triggers a behavior, and there's some consequence that maintains it. But in general, antecedents are just things that come across behavior, and training is an antecedent. Goal setting is an antecedent. Planning is an antecedent. Telling people what to do is an antecedent. But while antecedents get behavior going, what is it that maintains behavior? Drop that in the chat. What do we need to plan for to ensure that behavior continues? Yeah, reinforcement, the consequences, right? We got to make sure that all those behaviors, we get it going. If they don't get in touch with some sort of reinforcer, then that behavior is going to go away. And I'm going to show you a beautiful visual of this. Now, there are some systems theory, but I want you to remember that systems are made up of processes. Processes are made up of tasks, and tasks are made of behaviors. This is why I say this is still within the realm of behavior analysis. This just tends to be interlocking behaviors, right? We have some behavioral chains that make up like a task, right? And these tasks make up these bigger processes, and these processes collectively make up the systems. Systems theory can look more confusing. I'm going to simplify this, right? But if you take a look at this in a business environment, we could say it's the educational environment, right? And there's still all those things. There's the economy, there's the natural environment, there's the culture. And if we look over on this side, these are all the things that go into the system, right? There's money, there's the human resources, right? There's material supplies, there's technology. And then we get people in here. They're all intended to get people going, right? And these people engage in some sort of behavior, and they produce something, right? There's a product or a service. And the customer says, hey, I like this. And that gets fed back in. People keep doing what they're doing. Or I don't like this. And that should get fed back in. And we change that, right? And there should be a system for managing these people, right? So if we look at it, we call these things from systems theory inputs, right? And there's the behavior that occurs. and then we have outputs. Okay. And so you're like, well, that language sounds a little bit foreign to me. Well, I want to make it a little bit easier for you, because remember when I said earlier that these systems theory, like if we zoom out, it's like looking at the system as it's an organism. When I talked about the school, like I'm like, this is a great big organism, and I've got to figure out how to shape the behavior of this organism. And if we look at it from that perspective, we just change the language a little bit, and we start to see this a little bit differently, right? So if that's an organism, the organization is an organism, we might think about the inputs as antecedents, and we have the behavior, the collective behavior of that organism, which is the organization, and we have the consequences that they're producing, right? So they're producing some sort of product or services, and people are either going to say, hey, this is great, and that gets fed back in, and we maintain our behavior, or it's not, and we have to change our behavior, right? And across the whole top there are MOs. Does that make sense, everybody? I try to make this as simple as possible, right? Because systems theory can get very confusing. And I've seen a lot of the research out there, and I'm confused when I still look at it. But I want to just say that this is still within the realm. It's kind of zooming out. It's a molar look as opposed to a molecular look. Type in the chat if this makes sense. Corolla, thanks for the thumbs up. Or if you have a question about it. Okay, cool. Good. Totally. Yes. Yeah, great. Yeah. Again, keeping things. Now, if you want to dive into systems theory, go back and take a look. There's a lot of research on it. I like Meadows' theory. That was, I think, Rumler and Brett Brach. There's a bunch of books that they have out there, the white space. There's all sorts of good stuff out there. But that's it. That's an easy look at it. But I want to say that when we look at behaviors, and they're in organizational behavior management, we can do something called behavior systems analysis. And that is just looking at these interlocking behaviors, right? But it's still going to boil down to the ABCs of behavior, right? We still want to see what it looks like. If they're interlocking, it still requires, each individual has their own ABCs. So we want to take a look at that. So I decided to make this look a little bit easier. It's a little bit more linear to simplify this, okay? So remember I said that systems are made up of processes are made up of tasks, and tasks are made up of behaviors. Well, here are the behaviors within the system, right? And this is within a school system. I'm sorry about this, okay? And when we want to design a system, we want to make sure that we are starting with the end in mind. Why do you think that is? Why do we start with the results? Any thoughts on that? Why do we start with the results? What would be the problem if we started with behavior? I want you to just think about that for a second. You can drop something on the chat if you want or not. It's okay. I know you're putting yourself out on, Main Street there with some answers. But here's why. What is required to achieve results? There you go, Ashley. You nailed it, right? What end are you working towards, right? Yeah, working backwards. There's a purpose. This is what we're working on. All results require behavior. And if we're going to get a change in results, it requires people behaving more, less, or differently. Okay? More or less or differently. So we want to keep this very simple. So we start with the end result. Now, type a yes in here if you've worked in schools where there's a lot of suspensions. Have you guys worked in schools where suspensions are an issue? No, yes, okay. Let me see here. How about what do we say? How about suspensions or restraints? Yes. Okay. Some but not many. Type in here like an important result if you're working in a school that you'd want to produce. Most people are saying yes, but if you said no, that's okay. That's not in your school that you're working at, right? Maybe it's restraints. Maybe it's kids being, maybe it's in a classroom, students not, achieving their goals. Systems are made up of, Jen, systems are made up of processes are made up of tasks, and tasks are made up of behaviors. Yeah. Reducing restraint. Sure. Okay, great. Right. All this stuff. What about this? What about trauma-informed care? Anybody a supporter of trauma-informed care out here, or wish that they had an organization or a school that was trauma-informed? Okay, you got some yeses in here. Suspensions, Restraint, very strict on the use of restraints and seclusion. Okay. So let's look at it. I'm getting a lot of suspensions, and I'm also seeing people trauma informed. Okay. So here's what I will say. Now, first I'll go to suspensions. Suspensions are easier. And then I'll come back to trauma informed care with this. We'll go through each one of these. If we were going to reduce suspensions, all right, what would we need students to do if we're looking at the school wide, right? What do we need students to do? If we want to reduce suspensions, what do we need? And how are we going to measure that? Well, the measure is they input data for suspension, right? Kids suspended, that data gets input. So that's the measure, right? So we want to reduce that, and we have a metric of it. What do we need students to do? What behavior do we need to engage in if we're going to reduce suspensions? I see the things are still trickling in here. You are right, Suzanne. It's definitely not enough systematically. I'll be talking about that in just a second. Lack of classroom control. Okay. So Eric or whoever, follow the rules, right? Follow expectations. Let's keep it simple. So if we want to reduce suspensions, we need students to follow expectations, right? So let's pause on that. Now let's think about this. Let's go up the chain. If we want these students to follow expectations, what do we need the teacher to do? Okay, we said increase connection with our students. I like that, but I want to know behaviorally what that meant, right? We need to say, what does that mean for them to actually increase the connection? Teach the skills student needs to be successful, right? And then I would say, well, what does teaching look like, right? And we would say we could identify that because we want to be pinpointed with this stuff. And in organizational behavior management, we talk about pinpointing result. We have a precise result that we want to achieve, and we have precise behaviors that we want to engage in. And we want to just target a few behaviors the same way that we do within a plan, because if everything is important, nothing's important, right? So we focus on just a few key behaviors. And I would say that, teaching involves that we're going to, instruct the students. We're going to create a classroom management plan, right? This is the system. We're going to, and I would definitely involve the students in developing that, figuring out what their reinforcers are, also asking them what they think should happen when we correct behavior. I think that's really important for them to know the why behind it. You involve your stakeholders when you develop systems, right? So at the classroom level, we want the teacher to do that. So they design that system. And they instruct the students in it, right? They tell them, they give them a visual of it, right? They model it for them, and then they have them rehearse it and they practice it, right? So now we're training them. We're ensuring that they have the skills. And then we coach them in it because we have the skills and we make sure that that's great. But now we have to support the generalization of learned skills in the natural environment. And that's the difference between that you'll learn shortly between training and coaching. So we need the teacher to do that. Now, if we have the teacher to engage in those behaviors, what does the educator support need to do, right? Let's think about somebody that's outside the classroom, like instructional coaches or, somebody that's there to support the teacher. What behavior should they engage in to increase the likelihood that the teachers are going to create a classroom management plan, teach the classroom management plan, reinforce the expectations and correct the expectations as aligned with the classroom management plan? What would we want them to do? Yeah, there we go. Ashley, yes, give them a training, right? Help them to understand how to help them develop the classroom management plan. But remember that training is antecedent. What else do we need them to do? That's great. That's a part of the formula. And I just gave you part of the solution there. Help teachers train and reinforce the teachers on the plan. Yes. Okay. I'm going to say that what we call is, provide them with a guide. Yes, all that. But they need a little bit of coaching. And what we found is that training without coaching doesn't stick. It doesn't. We give people the skills, but we got to get people to behave well enough and long enough that they produce naturally occurring reinforcers. In this way, that naturally occurring reinforcer is going to take over for the teachers. Like, well, the kids are learning more, they're behaving better, their job's easier, they don't feel so frazzled, right? All these things become naturally occurring for them, and then we can fade out. Does that make sense, everybody? Right? Training versus coaching, training skill acquisition, coaching supporting the generalization of learned skills in natural environment. So we need the educator support to train them in classroom management, help them develop a classroom management plan, maybe set some goals with them, and do some follow-up and have a feedback loop in there, right? So if we were going to do that, what do we need? We're just going to come up, just for the sake of time, let's say collectively, what does the AP and the principal need to do under these conditions? What would they need to do to make this stuff happen? If they want the teachers to teach and train their classroom management plan, they want the educator support to train the teachers in that plan and coach them in it, what does administration need to do? Think about it behaviorally. It doesn't have to be sophisticated. Okay, so we provide an incentive, right? MO, I like that. In that book, I talk about leading as actually an MO. You're going to learn for that in a second. Give the resources and time. Yes, right. Put a schedule, identify the trainers, right? Notify them. There are all these little behaviors that need to occur. Set the expectation that this is what's going to happen, right? Involve them maybe in, hey, what kind of classroom management do you want to do? Let's select the kind of plan, right? Involve your stakeholders on what it's going to look like. We want them maybe put together a little a group that's going to help support this. In fact, they might even put together a little peer coaching group that once this is going on, get the teachers to go out there and observe each other and give feedback. Peer feedback is powerful. Then of course, set the expectations, right? So these are all some key behaviors that they want to engage in. And if they engage in these behaviors, that should move them towards this end result, right? Now, I mentioned trauma-informed care. And again, I'm not going to go through each one of these, right? But I want to say that if we want an organization, any organization, right? But if we're talking about schools, to be truly trauma-informed, right? Whatever that means, right? This is why I say whatever this means. How are we measuring that result? What are we going to do to measure that result? Now, that is up for debate right now in behavior analysis, how we measure that. But let's just say that it's social validity. Let's say that we want students to state that they feel safe. They feel like they have choice. They feel empowered, right? All of these principles of trauma-informed care, which I love, they are very closely in line with my values. But as a behavior analyst, I know that we need to operationalize stuff. So we have to be able to have a result to measure that, right? And if we want that to happen, what do we need the students to do, right? What do we need teachers to do? For example, if we want that student to feel safe, right? And we're getting them to report out that they are feeling safe. Don't we think that we need the teacher to engage in behaviors that are going to help them feel safe? And what are those behaviors? Or that are going to give them choice? And what are those behaviors? Or that are going to empower them? What are those behaviors? And if we want the teacher to help the students to feel safe and empowered and have choice and all these things, don't they need to feel safe? Don't they need to feel empowered? Don't they need to have choice? Wouldn't you guys agree on that? Don't we think that up the chain, that each person needs to have a result? And how are we going to measure that the teacher feels this way? And how are we going to measure, and what behaviors does the educator support need to do to support the teacher with that? And what's the principal and AP need to do so this all trickles down, right? I look at the principles of trauma-informed care as very close to my values. And values, to me, should be underlying of the things that guide our behaviors. We'll talk about that at the end of today. But we need to unpack what these behaviors are, and we have to have a way to measure it. Otherwise, it's people saying that we're trauma-informed, and we're a trauma-informed school or organization. No, you're not. Not if you haven't done this. Not if you haven't gone through each level of these performers to figure out how you're going to measure that they feel this way and determine what behaviors each person up the chain needs to engage in, right? Now, somebody said that I saw the culture survey. I love that, right? Climate survey. Here's what happens with that. If that was the measure, and we put some trauma-informed care language in there, here's the problem with that, is that it's given at the end of the year. You know what I call that? I call that an autopsy. What are you going to do with that at the end of the year when it's too late, right? I need to know from my stakeholders regularly. We need to check in with them. The same way let's say you guys are the educator support. You got to check in with your teachers to see, do they feel supported by you? Do they feel safe with you? Are you helping them to produce some sort of valid outcomes? And this needs to go up the chain. And the fact that schools is so common for them to give a climate survey, a culture survey at the end of the year drives me nuts, because that data should be looked at regularly and used as some sort of form of assessment. And it should be used to coach the principals, and the principals should be using it to coach the teachers and right down the line, because we should be checking with the students. And there's research to support this, that we should be saying, do you feel safe? Do you feel cared for? Do you feel supported? Do you feel like you're learning, right? And that data should be looked at by the teachers, and that data should be used to coach the teachers, because I believe that people have really good intent, right? But in the end, wouldn't you agree that while intent's important, that's about impact, right? In the end, it's about impact. And we have to measure how we're impacting people. I really believe social validity is extremely important. It's not just about producing results, but how did we produce those results, and how are people feeling about this? I feel strongly about this. So that's behavior and results, right? But it's more than this. We've got to keep this behavior going. Now, in order to do that, we want to quantify that result, right? So this is where goal setting comes in. Like, how many suspensions do we want to reduce it by, right? Is it a percentage or something like that? But also, in order to do that, we can quantify, we can break those goals down into accomplishments. And this is tremendously important, really important. Please remember this, right? Because this is incredibly important. We just laid out a bunch of things that need to happen in order to reduce suspensions. And we're hypothesizing that if people do engage in these behaviors, that eventually that suspension data is going to go down. But it's going to take time to get there. And if the school is only being measured, or that school leader is only being measured based on that result of suspensions going down, it's going to look like they're not doing anything. Why? Well, because we already agreed that we need teachers trained. We need them to create classroom management plans. We need them to teach the classroom management plan. They need them to coach. So each one of these it's like almost like a task analysis, where we are providing that, where we are making steps, these accomplishments. And if we follow this path, we're going to produce this result, right? So for example, it could be the accomplishment, it could be the number of teachers who have been trained, the number of teachers who have now a completed classroom management plan, the number of teachers who have taught the classroom management plan, the number of teachers or students who can state the expectations associated with the classroom management plan, number of teachers who are in the hallway greeting the kids, the number of teachers who are stopping them and having them walk back. All these serve as an accomplishment, right? This salient measurement that can be reported out and that serve as leading and lagging indicators in service of this longer term result, right? This long-term outcome. And this is important to identify these things up front, because when we have these accomplishments, it provides a behavioral roadmap to where we want to go. And it serves as a source of reinforcement, right? But it also serves as a source for people to self-monitor and report out what they're doing. Now, why do you think it's important for students, for example, to self-monitor and report out? Why do you think it's important for them to look at their behavior and their results and report out to the teacher? Why do you think this is important? Or maybe you don't think it's important. Yes, good. Checking for understanding, engaging and learning. Looking at their own behavior, right? And seeing that what they do, are they producing the results? Like, if there's a result and we have research evidence that says here's the behaviors that we need to engage in, that's what research is, right? And if you engage in these behaviors, it's going to produce a result. They can check their behaviors against the standard, this rubric, whatever it is, right? Against this point sheet, if you will, right? So yes, we want to foster autonomy. I love that. Very good, Katie. Autonomy, right? We want people to be able to better assess, problem solve, make decisions, and take actions despite us. So we need them to be reflective of their own behavior and the outcomes, and we got to create environment. If not, they become prompt dependent. Are you guys familiar with prompt dependency? You're already putting in their independent. I love that. Well, if you're not familiar with prompt dependency, and please steal this analogy, because this is, I think analogies help people to learn more in metaphors. Who in here uses it? Type in the chat if you use a GPS. If you use a GPS to go somewhere and you use it all the time to go to the same place, you use a GPS, you're using the GPS to go to the same place. And if you are like me, you are prompt dependent on that GPS, right? Because the GPS needs to tell you what to do constantly, because you haven't allowed for the natural stimulus in the environment to tell you which direction to go, to turn left, to go right, right? You're not able to discriminate those things because you're dependent. And we need for people not to be problem dependent, right? We need them to better assess problems, make the decision, take action. We want them to engage in behavior independently despite us. This is what good leaders do. And you're going to learn in a little bit that we can and should all be good leaders, but leadership's not about title. Okay. We all agree on that. See a bunch of, yes, good. It's me too. So don't worry about it. I do it all the time. It's crazy. But now it's not just about self-monitoring and reporting out. If you notice, this is a loop here, right? And this is about a feedback loop. It's about either reciprocal feedback or bidirectional feedback. And it's about feedback going both ways. Now, what do I mean by feedback going both ways? What do I mean by reciprocal or bidirectional feedback? What do you guys think that means? Type that in the chat if you have any idea what I'm talking about. Brian's got Boy George. Awesome. Okay. Yes. Feedback from the teacher to the student and vice versa, or feedback from the educator support to the teacher and vice versa, or from AP to the educator and teacher and vice versa. We need to have a feedback loop, right? Now, here's what I mean by this loop. Yes. Reciprocity, right? It's so incredibly, all learning requires feedback. We tend to make feedback unidirectional. It tends to go down. That is not good behavior analysis. It's not good leadership. It's not good coaching. We need to be checking in with our people, and we all are agreed on that, right? With social validity. But we also, and how am I doing for you? I might think I'm doing great, but we might be producing results, but they don't like the way it's going, right? They don't like the way you're coaching them or supporting them. So we need feedback to adjust what we're doing. But we also need to use their performance as feedback for us. Because if they're not performing to a standard, if you're engaging in any sort of blaming, if you're engaging in any sort of coercion for that, right, or talking smack about the person, they need to do this and they need to do that, and I've done it a bunch. But if you're like me and you've done that, you are suffering from behavioral myopia, meaning you have no longer kept your behavior lens on because there's a reason that they are not performing to a standard. And so the question then becomes, why and what are you, wherever you are in this chain, what are you going to do more or less or differently that's going to impact that performer's behavior, right? That teacher's behavior, your RBTs, if you're a director or whoever you're supporting, right? The principals, whatever it is. If they're not doing what they're supposed to be doing, then you need to do something more or less or differently. You got to get to the why behind it. Would you guys agree with that? And I'm not saying it's easy, by the way, but blaming them, getting mad at them, trying to coerce them, that means you do not have your behavior analytic lens on. The first thing is determining the why behind it, the same way you determine the function behind student behavior. It's the same thing for adults. And so we look at their performance, and if they're not performing to standard, we got to think, what am I going to do? When my fighters lose, the first place I look in the mirror, right? And sure, they might not have been eating well. They might not have been conditioning like they should have. And I got to think about what leadership hat I'm going to put on, which you're going to learn about in just a little bit, in order to improve their performance. Sometimes I got to engage in MOs. Sometimes I got to engage in antecedents. Sometimes I got to adjust the consequences, right? We need to keep this look through the 4-term contingency because this is how we change behavior. So we need feedback to be going back and forth, okay? We need to be reciprocated all the way up the chain for everybody. So this got to be planned for in the system. Now, we also need to make sure that, as I said at the beginning, good systems should be designed to create more positive reinforcement for value-added behavior, right? For behavior that's in service of the end result, and also that's in line with values, okay? And so this needs to be designed. In understanding, just like we want to know what the students' preferences are, we need to know up the chain what the people's preferences are. But we also need to know what the pain points are. In short, these are the reinforcers. They're positive reinforcers and they're negative reinforcers. Believe me, teachers do not want to deal with behavior challenges. If they knew better, they would do better, right? But knowing is not about telling them. It's about making sure they have the skills to do it. It's about making sure they engage in the skills and that it's produced outcomes for them in the past, so they know that these behaviors will produce these outcomes, and that being a valued outcome. That's what knowing is for them, right? In short. And so we have to make sure that we know this about each person, and we need to, again, get them to behave well enough and long enough where they get in touch with those reinforcers. So in the schools, I hear very often you can't make it about the students, or we have to make it about the students. But what are you seeing here, right? If we're going to make it about the students, and people say this all the time, you got to do it for the students. You cannot make it about the students without making it about the adults in the building. You can't. Because if we all agree to change student behavior, we need to change the behavior of the change. We have to consider their behaviors and their reinforcers. We have to. And so I feel like, and I'm not going to say, people say it all the time, but I feel like too often it's a cop-out where we say, you do it for the students. Okay, well, you do it for the students. What are you going to do more or less or differently that's going to help people to do it for the students? And we need to know what the reinforcers are. And I'm telling you that teacher that's struggling and can barely keep their head above water because behavior challenges are so difficult, even though you've told them to do things, telling is antecedent, right? Believe me, again, if they knew better, they would do better, because their job, you and I know that their job is so much more challenging right now because they're not doing these other things, because behavior's off the chain, because they don't have the tier 1 approach. And there's a reason they're not doing those things. So we have to get to it, and we need to find those quick wins. Like I did with the hallway, right? Sometimes it's getting the teacher to change one transition, right? Change 1 5-minute block. Help them to see by engaging in some sort of, low response effort, that they can produce some sort of valid result. And then you begin to shape that up more. Does that make sense, everybody? Type a yes or a hell yes or a thumbs up if that does make sense. Cool, right? Okay, so now a little reminder, a little visual, so that we all are reminded about specifically what is positive reinforcement versus negative reinforcement. Okay, so I want this visual to be etched in your mind. I'm thankful for Littell and Perret for pumping this research out a while back, because to me this is just the greatest visuals that I've ever seen to explain reinforcement. All right, so in the world of organizational behavior management, we have antecedents. I explained earlier that antecedents are things like training, planning, goal setting, all these telling, all these things that come before behavior. We get behavior going. Now, what do we all agree that? We all agree that if behavior doesn't get in touch with some sort of reinforcement, it goes away. And if you're a behavior analyst, you believe that. Otherwise, if you don't believe that, then maybe you're in the wrong field, right? It goes away, right? There's no meaningful consequence or no reinforcers, with the exception of, respondent behavior. All right. So if we use, let's say we give people the training, we do all this great stuff, behavior gets going. If we use fear of consequences to drive behavior, we're going to get people to do just enough to get by, and only when we're looking. And here's what typically happens, whether it's a teacher in the classroom, whether it's at school level, where it's at the district level, whether it's in your own organization because you guys are consulting. I've seen this happen again and again and again and again, even in our own field. And that is, we become so reliant on antecedents. So the beginning of the year, the leader, whoever it is, makes a great speech and gives a bunch of resources. And Aubrey talks a lot about this stuff, sends people to training, and people are fired up. My colleague Anik and I were just I did a talk in front of like 4,000 people, man, at a school district, and people are fired up. It's really great to see, right? So this is an MO. They're getting ready to go. They're getting the skills, right? So all these are antecedents, moving behavior in the right direction. And in about 2 to 3 months, when things are still not moving in the right direction, people are performing the standard, they'll be told to do the same thing. They might have more meetings. They might be, send some people back to more trainings. They might allocate some more resources. And then when people still aren't performing to a standard, what do you think they do? Right? What do you think they do? Type in the chat. You've done all these things, training, speeches, meetings, resources, et cetera, close, Ashley. It's before they get fired. When they're not doing it, they come out and they send them to more meetings, more resources, do that, right? Anybody fire them is probably like down the chain. Yep. Yeah, that would say the punishment. Yep, they do all this stuff. Yep. But here's, in short, they come out and they say the same thing right? The same thing that they've been saying, but now they say it a little bit longer, a little bit louder, and a little bit meaner. Have you guys experienced that? And if you have, what I would say is like they keep doing the same thing. These are all antecedents. Nobody's looking at the consequences of behavior and getting them to behave well enough or long enough in order to produce those consequences. And this is why we have to make sure that we plan for consequences, right? We got to make sure we plan for reinforcers, particularly positive reinforcer, but we have to know why they're not doing those things. That's right. And we got to make sure that the effort is worth the reinforcer and that we're making the reinforcement, they can see the impact that they're having, right? That we know it's actual reinforcers. So when people are forced to do things, right? When they're doing things in the performance world, not everything is in negative reinforcement is bad, right? Taking aspirin, get rid of a headache. That's good. Lots of things that we do, behaviors that occur because of negative reinforcement. But in the performance world, in the OBM world, when I'm talking about negative reinforcement, I'm talking about people behaving because of fear of consequences. When people behave because of fear of punishment, they will do just enough to get by. And what do you think is going on right here? What's going on right there? Type in the chat if you know what's going on right there, where they're performing a little bit better than they normally do. Okay, they might be getting praise. Yep, sure. Self-preservation. Yeah, they're definitely giving self-preservation. Yep. Seeing improvement with the client. Maybe. Let's hope. I wish it was that. Let me ask you this. When's the one time that for sure in your local area that you definitely do the speed limit? Joe got it, right? When's the one time you definitely do the speed limit? Who's watching? Yep. It was observational reactivity. There you go. Yep. Now, if you want to go out and monitor everybody all the time, I think there's a word for that, like micromanagement. Be my guest, but you're not going to get the best out of people. We want to get people in touch with naturally occurring positive reinforcement, right? So they're going to behave even when you are not looking. Otherwise, if there's no meaningful outcome for them, then they're going to stop doing it, So we have to make sure that we do that. For example, that teacher who we help to use some sort of behavior management strategy, if they're seeing, again, that their job got a little bit easier, the kids are learning a little bit more, disruptions are down, they're getting some positive feedback from administration, parents are happy or whatever, they're going to keep doing that thing, whether we are there or not, right? Whether we are there or not. This is why it's our job to help shape that behavior. Now, again, we can look at the organization as an organism, right? The collective behavior. If we're doing a molar look at it, we're trying to produce some sort of result. But this is the only way to get people to go above and beyond what Aubrey likes to call discretionary effort, right? And I like to pair the name shaping with coaching. We can consider ourselves coaches are the best tool of shaping. But this is us shaping, right? This is us telling them they're doing a good job. This is us asking them good questions, right? Trying to get them to see the impact of their behavior on the environment. All of a sudden, they see this. This is gold. This is the naturally occurring positive reinforcer that's going to keep them moving when we're not looking. This is them seeing like, oh, man, Johnny raised his hand that time. Or, I noticed that more of the kids were on task during that 5-minute block, or that transition was a little bit easier. And I like that. That's good. I feel good about this. Or look at this formative assessment. Kids have learned a little bit more because of doing this. So we just continue to help shape, and we continue to try to help them to align their behavior with these outcomes, right? With these naturally occurring reinforcers. When I say naturally occurring, they're natural to the context. But a lot of people say like, well, we shouldn't be using contrived reinforcers, right? We shouldn't be doing this or that, or kids should want to learn. And you guys know that stuff is bunk. We want them to learn. We want the learning to be the reinforcer. But if they are not interested in that learning right now, then we have to contrive some reinforcers to eventually it makes it so that reading, the love of reading takes over as the reinforcer. This is the way that they want to do things, right? And that is the ultimate goal. But we have to connect the dots. We have to bridge the gap between where they are and where we want them to go. And first of all, the greatest behavioral defense in schools is engaging instruction that's just a little bit challenging, right? Because challenges get people to work harder towards things, right? Can't be too challenging, but challenging. That's the first line of defense against behavior. Everything else comes secondary, right? But you think about it. the more engaged students are, the more likely they're on task, and the less likely it's oftentimes it's incompatible with off-task behavior because they're doing this thing. And you think about if you've ever been to a boring talk. If this talk was boring, and I hope that it's not boring for you, but if it was boring, you'd have me on mute. You know what I mean? You'd be doing other work. And some of you still might be doing that. I don't know. You'd be trying to listen on to where you can get your, answer the questions so you can get your CUs. I don't blame you. I've been there. I've done it, but when we can get teachers to engage students and we can help them to engage in those behaviors, like things like opportunities to respond, right? Opportunities to respond are great ways to engage students in the learning. And that oftentimes is incompatible with off-task behaviors. It's really important. So this is how we get people to go above and beyond. And our goal really in the end, we're not just in the business of behavior change, right? Are we? Are we in the business of habit development or habit change? And when we think about habit, we got to think about shifting from down here. This is about kind of telling people what to do. That's the training, planning, goal setting, or whatever, right? Then we begin shifting to asking, what are you doing? What's happening? And here, what will you do next, right? This is where they might innovate, do some other things. All this stuff is a formula for making performance happen. And too often people are only focusing in this area on the antecedent side. Okay. Now, remember earlier when I said, I'm going to tie this in values with a little bit, right? We're going to talk about doing a self-behavior analysis. That will be my ending. But we still have a little bit of time. Now, when individuals aren't performing to a standard, as I mentioned earlier, we know what people do. But there's two general reasons why. Can you type those in the chat if you know why? If somebody's not performing to a standard, what are the two general reasons why? We can call these behavioral classifications, right? Okay, knowledge behaviors, yeah. Jade's quick on the friggin' type for this stuff, man. All right, so we'll say it's a skill deficit. Okay, yeah, there you go, Miranda. Can't do or won't do, right? So skill deficit versus a performance deficit. Oops. But that came up before it should have. I want you guys to stop what you're doing right now. Use this QR code because you're gonna get an opt-in thing. It's through PCMA. Don't worry about it. They're not gonna hound you. You can unsubscribe to this. But I created a performance diagnostic checklist for educators like a year and a half ago, and I forgot that we even had this stuff in one of our funnels. So if you hit this QR code, just put your email in it. You're going to be able to download this PDC, and then you can unsubscribe whenever you want to. But it's powerful because it's a 2-page questionnaire, and it helps. It's grounded in good research. It's really the 4-term contingency, and it helps us to decide if something is a skill deficit or a performance deficit, and sometimes it's both, depending on what we're looking at, right? So go ahead and get your phone out. Hit the QR code, download that real quick, or put your name in there so you can get the download on it. It's very, very simple. It's powerful. I can't use it on my phone. We share the link. Let me see if I can grab the link real quick for you guys. I'm going to try to grab that link. You know what? You guys are in luck too. I have this up. All right. So here's the link. Remember the visuals that I gave you guys earlier? With the starting with N in mind. This link is the link to figuring out how do you create a trauma-informed environment, and it gives you like downloadables and videos for developing it. But it doesn't matter, whatever end result you want to produce, suspensions, restraints, whatever it is, the process is all the same. I was just explaining, hey, if we're going to make any organization trauma-informed, you need to operationalize all this stuff, and there's downloadables. So that's that link there. Okay, now I'm going to give you the other link to the PDC. Oh, wait, hold on. Is that it? Yeah, here it is. I'm good. I had that stuff up, right? Here you go. This is the link to the PDC there. So take a look at that one. It's the same thing. It's just another opt-in. That's going to be a downloadable. Download that thing. Put it next to your computer, right? Carry it around with you. When I look at performance, whether it's my fighters, whether it's a student, whether it's the adult, these are the questions that are critical to ask because you just change the nouns in it. It's all the same thing. You could do it with parents, right? It's all the same stuff. I love the PDC because it's practical. And this is where I live in the world of practicality. So I'll give you guys another minute to download that one. Yeah, thanks, Kelly. Yeah, everything I do is like simplified. I've put the PDC in every book that I've written because it is so simple and it's so important. including my last book, Positional Authority Ain't Leadership, which I hope that you guys check out. I'll drop my link in here again. Here's my link while we're on it, and I'll drop it in here one more time because I screwed up all the QR codes. If you can, connect with me. That's where I have a number of free resources, my newsletters, sign up for the newsletters, my podcast, but also my books. My last book, all this stuff is grounded in Positional Authority Ain't Leadership, navigating bullshit, optimizing behavior science for navigating bullshit, optimizing performance, and avoiding ass clownery. It was cathartic to write it, and it's probably going to be cathartic to read it. But I'm going to talk about a little bit about that in terms of leadership. Thank you guys. But again, you don't kind of buy anything. I'm not trying to sell you anything. I make like pennies on books. I want to equip you guys with good science and practical science that you guys can use anywhere. All right. So there's that link. All right. So now, excuse me, I'm actually fighting sinus infection here, I think. So there's only two reasons, and that shouldn't have come up there in front of it. Apparently I had that come out in the wrong way. It's a performance deficit or it's a skill deficit. So sorry about the QR code there, right? So we need to assess this. If people aren't performing to a standard, there's the why, right? We can't blame. That means we're suffering from behavior myopia. So we just talked about systems. We've talked about systems analysis. We talked about performance engineering. That was the linking all those behaviors together. And by the way, folks, performance is just behavior and results with criteria under certain conditions, right? It still comes back to behavior and results, which is the OBM way. This is the thought process when you think about OBM. This is basically boiling it down to its basic units of measure. You know, what are you doing and what result are we producing as a result of that behavior? All right, so here's what I want you to know, okay? Good systems, even well-designed systems like we talked about, are not going to work without good leadership, right? And the same thing is that good leadership won't work without good systems. So I kind of coined this thing because I'm a fighter and I see life through the eyes of a fighter, but a fighter with a behavior analytic lens on it. But a great leader without a solid system is like a skilled fighter with no game plan, right? They're just going out and doing things. And a robust system without a dynamic leader is like having a perfect plan, but not a champion to execute it. So I think it's important to understand that. But you also need to understand this. This is really important, that leadership ain't about title, right? None of these names matter. And let me ask you, have you ever worked for somebody that had positional authority, but they weren't leaders? Have you ever showed up to work and their car was in the parking lot and you felt sick to your stomach? Or Sunday night rolls around, you're like, I don't want to go into work because I feel so miserable. Did that bring out the best in you? If you felt that way, were you performing the best when you were operating under conditions where you felt afraid of the leader, you felt afraid that was going to happen? Yeah. And it happens too often. I have a dream that one day people are going to want to come to work and love their work and feel valued. Right now, I am so grateful that I am living my passion. I feel like there's a job, there's your career, and there's your passion. And I've learned what my passion was, and I made my passion my niche. I tried to learn as much as I could about it so that I could actually have a career doing it. And I don't feel like I'm working like 95% of the time. Like the flying, I fly a lot of places, and that feels like work, even though you're sitting there. It's like so stressful, but I love it. I wish everybody felt this way, because if our teachers felt that way, they would bring out the best in students, and school leaders feel good, and work would be like a wonderful place. But there's a lot of research that says poor work environments, toxic work environments, increased mental health issues, increased turnover, increased accidents, decreased performance, all of these things. And people end up doing things. They end up using coercion to force people to do things, and they're winning the battle, but they're losing the war, right? It's not good, man. And so none of this stuff is about title. So in the end, everybody, regardless of your title, it's about linking key behaviors with valued results. Okay. It's coming down to behavior and results, right? Keep this thing simplified. Now, in my book, Positional Authority Ain't Leadership, I think it was the first to do this. I've taken leadership and I've divided into 4 what I call hats, right? These are functional approaches. And to me, it's every leader, regardless of your title, needs to be able to engage in these behaviors or have a system that allows for this to happen. Now, here's the difference. And usually when I can, actually, I'm going to take my headphones on. off for a second, right? Because I would like for you guys to have the visual. If the people I'm working with, whether it's a teacher, whether I'm a CEO of the organization, whether it's a student, if they are not motivated, right, to move towards some goal, I've got to put on my leading hat. Leading is a motivating operation, particularly an establishing operation, right? It has a value and a behavior altering effect. So if somebody doesn't want to do something, I've got to put on that leading hat, right? Because I got to create a want. Does that make sense, everybody? That's the function of the leading hat. Type a yes if that makes sense to you guys. Leading is about an MO, particularly an EO, right? Leading has a value and behavior altering effect. And I'm not saying it's easy to do, but remember, this is not just the 3-term contingency, it's the 4-term contingency. Good. Okay, excellent. Now, we might create a want towards some vision, towards some goal, right? But now we've got to make sure that people have the skills to do it. And that requires the training hat, right? The training hat is about skill acquisition, right? We got to equip people with the skills. So this is why you need to know why people aren't performing. And this is why we have to engage in performance diagnostics. This helps, right? So this is chapter 4 in my book, right? The training hat. What's that entail? Because training just isn't telling. We got to make sure that we do it right. But as you learned earlier, training is an antecedent. And almost most of the time, the research by Joyce and Showers 2002 shows this pretty well. I can tell you with my own fighters that they might perform very well outside of the cage of the ring. In the fight, they're going to perform terribly if I don't support the generalization of those learned skills into that environment. And I do that through simulations. I do that through sparring. And this is getting their behavior in touch with naturally occurring reinforcers. And that is the job of the coaching hat, right? Getting people to behave well enough and long enough so they produce some sort of naturally occurring reinforcers. And all this comes down to behavior. Okay. It comes down to our behavior, right? Knowing when to put on what hat. Training and coaching, we shift to asking people about the behavior and the impact that they're having, right? We help them to connect. And the final hat, the coaching hat or the managing hat, right? This is about maintenance. And this is about leveraging the contingencies that make up your existing system. And if there's a good system in place, you just let the system do the work. The same way when you're driving out somewhere, that the cops aren't having to go tell you what to do all the time. And if you do the right thing, you get to where you need to go safely and effectively and efficiently. If you do the wrong thing, there are other contingencies that happen, right? But we want to make sure that in the organization, like there are common bonuses that happen or common recognitions or whatever, and things are, lots of reinforcements being produced for behavior, but also there are corrections that happen. Everybody is aware of those. They agree on it, right? They've had a say in it, and that's the managing, right? So leading an MO, training had about skill acquisition, coaching about the generalization of the skills into the natural environment, and managing is about maintenance. Okay. Managing is about maintenance. Now, in my book, what I'm very clear about is that none of this stuff matters if you don't ground everything you're doing in values and shared values. So let's talk about this, because I like to think about, I love the use of the ACT matrix. Remember, I like simplicity. And here's why I like simplicity. Complexity is the enemy of execution, the enemy of sustainability, and the enemy of scalability. So we got to keep it simple. KISS, keep it simple, scientists, right? Keep it simple. So I like to think of the ACT matrix. And guys, I am no RFT guy. I know very little about ACT, but I love the ACT matrix, which I'm about to show you. I look at it as a self-behavior analysis, right? And it can be used as an individual or an organization. And I keep it very behavioral nature. You're going to hear me say everything that aligns perfectly with radical behaviorism. And if you're an ACT person, feel free. You can, there's lots of things that you know about it, but I just keep it very simple because I believe this is how we need to operate. I like parsimony, right? So in the bottom right-hand corner, these are what we call your values, right? This is us in the middle observing, right? This is us. Now, I'm going to use myself as an example, right? And if we're looking at it as an organization, we can talk about it as shared values. And these are our preferences, right? This might be considered a preference assessment. Does that make sense, everybody? A preference assessment, right? These are stated ways of being and doing. Values are not goals. They're ways of being and doing. And we can have values-driven goals. Like, I love to be kind. I'd love to be helpful to people. And this is all contextual. In the ring, I'm not so kind and I'm not so helpful. I don't want to hit anybody unless I'm in that context, right? I value some different things. But one of my most powerful values is I'd like to disseminate the science of human behavior. That makes sense, right? I like to disseminate. This is one of my core values. I love to help people to better help themselves and others through the science, because this is the greatest science in the world for helping. This is the science of helping from my perspective. Well, I have things that show up for me, right? These private events, these are covert behaviors, right? Nobody can see these things. Nobody can see my values. Nobody can see these events that happen within me. I tact those things like as anxiety, or I have thoughts show up. And one of the thoughts that would show up before I used to public speak, believe it or not, this is a true story, I'm not making it up. I used to have a massive fear of public speaking, massive fear. I don't know what happened to me when I was younger, but I can tell you that I did everything to avoid public speaking, right? So when somebody said, right, when I was working for the school board, say, hey, we got a training coming up in 3 months, right? And I said, I don't want to do that. I'll tell you what I'll do. And I would engage in escape motivated behavior. And I would say things like, I'll do the research. I'll develop the PowerPoint. I'll set up the room, anything but getting in front of a bunch of people and talking, right? And this allowed me to escape these negative feelings. Now think about how good does it feel when you've gotten rid of anxiety? I'm sure that everybody in here has dealt with anxiety at one time or another. Doesn't it feel good to get rid of that feeling? And sometimes we're engaging in behaviors that are great, right? They're perfectly in line with our values. But other times we don't. That's why people do drugs and drink and they get stuck on this side, because it's like winning the battle but losing the war, right? It's circular, right? We feel a way, we behave a way, and it allows us to escape these. Now, cognitive behavioral therapists will tell you to change your thoughts to change your behaviors, right? And I do it sometimes. I do it a lot. You're overthinking this and blah, blah, blah. The problem is when you get stuck on trying to change the way that you're thinking about this, right? It means that you're focusing on, it's like holding a ball underwater instead of focusing on behavior. So what we need to do is be aware of our values, right? Our stated values. This is our preference, right? Be aware that when we think or feel this way, we engage in these behaviors. This is like a self-functional behavior assessment, right? And instead of engaging these behaviors, we need to accept, call it whatever you want, right? We can accept that we're doing this stuff, or you just say, never mind the word accept. We need to initiate other behaviors. And this is like our behavior plan, our self-behavior plan, right? Or if it's an organization, these are shared values and these are shared adversives that show up for us inside private events. And these are shared behaviors that we engage in to avoid these aversives. What do we need to do collectively? What are the key behaviors that we need to do, that are going to move us towards our values? Now, remember I said that my values were disseminating the science of human behavior. So when I had these thoughts and feelings show up and I engaged in these behaviors, I had to say, you know what? I got to do something else. And here's what I started to do instead. And by the way, these feelings didn't go away. It's not like I said, I'm going to do this instead, and these went away. I had to carry the monkey on my back. But what I did was I learned how to tell stories. I learned how to slow my speech down a bit. I learned how to put together a sequence of PowerPoint that would prompt me. I learned to, tie into what people's pain points are and there's both in their values, right? The reinforcers. And so as I began to do that, what do you think started to happen more and more, right? As I began to public speak more and engage in these behaviors, and I engaged in them successfully, what do you think I started to see for myself? All right. So I'm in there, I'm giving a talk and I'm being successful in my talk. What are some outcomes that I'm producing? And you can't be wrong. There could be a lot of different things. What do you think some of the outcomes that I were producing are that might have been important to me? Okay. So encounter more reinforcement. Yeah, there we go. What kind of reinforcement is that? Feedback from the audience, smiles, people nodding, right? A lot of times I see people kind of looking off into space and I realize I got them thinking about something, right? People coming up afterwards and saying, hey, that made sense. I never thought about it that way. And then that started happening more and more and more. And as I started getting in touch with more of this reinforcement, what do you think happened to all these crappy feelings on the side? What do you think happened to this stuff? Did they go up or they go down? Yeah, man, they went almost all the way away. Now, as I mentioned, just this past year, I spoke live in front of 4,000 people. And when they told me it was going to happen, I said, I'm going to crush it. I couldn't wait to get up there and share the science of human behavior and show people how proud I am of the science and how it can help people make a positive difference. And I did it. And I'll do it again, and I'll do it again, and I'll do it again. But it required me to know my values, be aware of my covert behaviors, be aware of what I did when the stuff was showing up, and have some sort of replacement behavior to engage in. And the more I engage in that replacement behavior, just the act of doing it was automatically reinforcing. I'm like, you know what, I'm doing this stuff. This is really important. I'm going to keep doing it, right? But I got in touch with all sorts of other positive reinforcement, and that felt great. And I didn't try to get rid of this behavior. It just happened naturally. Does that make sense, everybody? And if it does make sense, you can do this with a teacher when you go into the classroom. You can say, what are your values? What's showing up for you? What behaviors do you engage in when, students are off task or whatever? Is that in line with your values? And what are some things that you might do? Can I help you with those behaviors? Can I help you engage in behaviors that are going to move you towards your values? Or if it's a school and you say to the teachers, collectively, what do we value? Well, if we talked about trauma-informed care and the principles, we can say, hey, these are values, and what's showing up for us with this, and what do we behave in, and what should we do? And we identify those behaviors, and we focus on those behaviors, and we align them up the chain. Now we're starting to make some change. Now things become really powerful. Now we're moving towards, Jennifer just said, or Tarnish just said, Tamsin just said, sorry, we're moving towards building habits. So here are some of my references. And how did I do for you guys today? Was it what you thought? Did I deliver? I want to deliver for you guys. I'm passionate about this stuff. I really want to make a positive difference in the world, and I want to do it through the practical application of the science of human behavior. I think that's very important to me. So yeah, thank you guys. Now, that QR code, remember I told you I screwed up and I put the same QR code throughout. That's just that PDC QR code again. So, if you didn't get it earlier, you can use that. But again, so Corolla is back here. I want to open up to any questions for you guys.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, Paulie. I think that was just incredible. I mean, the feedback, I've never seen as many people say that much in any of the talks. So
I'm humbled and grateful.
Engaged.
Thank you guys. Truly.
So it's just been an absolute privilege to have you here. There are a couple of questions if you have another few minutes.
Yes, let's go. I love it.
There, I think you've probably answered some of them, but the one that got the most votes was, is OBM, can it be implemented in the restaurant business?
Oh, yeah.
I think you've already spoke. Yeah.
Anywhere that you're trying to get results through the behavior of others, then OBM is what you need, right? If you're engaging directly with somebody, then you don't need OBM, right? Because OBM is just ABA, but you're trying, remember, where you have interlocking behavior. So I love the question, and there are no stupid questions. I had to figure this stuff out for a while. I was kind of confusing ABA and OBM. I'm like, oh yeah, I kind of get it now.
Yeah. There was somebody asking about the slides, and I think I've said it a couple of times. This talk has been recorded, so we'll put up the recording, and the recording is available through Behaviour Live, and later on it'll be available through the Centre for Behavior Analysts at Queen's as well. That usually takes a wee minute or two, but it will be available for you to have a look at.
Yeah, and please
another question.
Go through that one. Those two downloadables I send. The one, because I know everybody likes these slides here. Hold on, let me go backwards on this because I want to show what you're gonna get. These. Well, I have to go through a lot of clicking here. Hold on. And now I'll get that question, Kroll, so these slides, right? The ones that look like this, it helps you to unpack behavior, get you to think behaviorally. So you could show up to a school, any organization, start to think about what result do we want to produce and what behaviors do we want to unpack. So it walks you through the methodology. Very, very simple. It's not perfect, but it's simple.
Yeah. There's somebody wondering, I'm not quite sure that I understand the question completely, but I'll read it out anyway. Do you have resources to ask for better performance feedback, especially to invite feedback from lower down the chain?
Yeah, I love that. So I like to use, there's a couple ways I like to do it. I like to use like simple social validity. I like to use either like if it's live, I'd like to have people do a paper and pencil, right? Very old school. Put it in a bucket because I want people to feel safe, right? Under conditions where people don't feel safe, they're not going to give you accurate data about how they're feeling about something. So this is really important. I think that if you really want accurate data from people to tell you how you're feeling, it needs to go to an anonymous source, and that anonymous source needs to be a coach of the individual. And I believe that they need to summarize the data and highlight the points, right, of what's going well, and talk about plan to making things better, right? Because one of the things that can happen if you don't have some sort of social validity is that sometimes people just misunderstand things. So imagine it's a school at 6 months later and people thought one thing the whole 6 months, but it was wrong. They had misinformation for whatever reason. The whole time they're operating on this false premise, where if you would know that as a leader right away or very quickly, and that could be dampening performance, right? That you could give them the right, hey guys, sorry about that. I know that you didn't understand. I didn't do a great enough job explaining the why. Let me give you the why behind this. Thank you for that feedback. And when you begin operating on their feedback, when you involve your stakeholders and you reach out for them and you act on their feedback, they will love you, right? Because you're hearing them. We don't, in the performance sense, we don't want to do things to people. We want to do things with them. And you think about that. You don't want your boss telling you to do this thing. You want them getting your involvement, asking you what you think is important. And when you author it, and when you get people to author things, they're going to own it. So that's a great question.
Yeah, and here's, I think this is quite an interesting one here, because it's when things are out of your control, like you're short-staffed or you have lack of fidelity when implementing plans and so forth, negative reinforcement for staff from suspending, admin not wanting to lose staff by putting more on them. What do you do whenever the system is basically not under your control?
Here's what I do is that I got to put on my leading hat. And for me, like when I go out, my colleague Anik and I consult in school districts everywhere. And before we go out into any schools, we want to get in front of all leaders. Even if they want to hire us to do training, like we don't want to do training right now until people hear from us, because we want there to be a want. We need them to understand the why. We got to have buy-in for them, but we don't want to force people into things. We want to reinforce them into things, right? So we do that, and that creates an EO because people don't know what they don't know. And when I give my talks, and this is just my approach to it, right? Get on my leading hat. I see people reflect like, oh, this makes sense. And I've had principals come up to me and district leaders saying, you know what? I can see a lot of things that I was doing that I shouldn't. This is why in the Positional Authority 8 leadership book, I have like, it's called Don't Be an Ass Clown at the end of every chapter, right? It's like, don't be an ass clown and what to do instead. And I've engaged in ass clown behavior. And that's an acronym for something, by the way. I've done it. But because first thing you got to do is promote awareness with people, but in a way that's gentle, because most of the time I think if people knew better, they would do better. And when it comes to leadership, they don't know better because we as a science have not done a good enough job disseminating so that way that a lot of leadership programs are grounded in behavior principles. Because I've taught some of those programs and I'm like, yeah, you're missing a lot.
Mm-hmm. I think there are some more questions. Have you got a bit more time for us?
Yeah, go shoot.
Yeah.
I'll drop my link back in here for anybody that missed it earlier.
Oh, brilliant. What are some potential reinforcers that a school administration can use for educators or teachers? What do you think? Man,
I think that teachers and school leaders but the good ones are perhaps the greatest leaders that we have in our society because they don't have extra money to give things, right? They don't have the ability to give them money or additional things. So what I found is that if you teachers are in such a state of deprivation for just somebody saying, you did a good job, or asking, and this is sad, right? It's sad that it's like this way, or just asking them their opinion or getting them involved or getting them to own things and highlighting the positive outcomes that are coming, right? Those are powerful reinforcers for them. But here's a really powerful reinforcer is that make their job easier. Show them that by doing this, something important is happening for them. Their job is easier. The kids are behaving better. Learning is happening. And when you get that going, they're going to keep doing that stuff when you're not looking. In the meantime, I used to do laps around the school. I'd show up and they were doing it just because they knew I was coming. I would say, thanks for doing it. But eventually, right, even though it was probably negative reinforcement at first, and I set up like a raffle ticket. I don't believe they were doing it for the raffle ticket. I was catching them being good. I believe that they were doing it because they knew I was coming to look. The goal was I was making the interaction positive. The goal was for them to see that, oh, I'm doing this and look what's happening as a result of it. So I picked a few key things. These were quick wins I was doing. And this is how I was able to, shape like whole schools, but again, starting with quick wins.
Yeah. I was thinking that whenever you're answering the question, like the quick win of you're running around the schoolyard or something when they were coming into, the very first example you were using.
Yes, the arrival time.
It seemed a very simple thing to do, and yet had a major effect.
A ripple effect across the whole, across my whole life, by the way, but whole school, and it just built so much belief. People got to believe in you, and you can't tell them they got to believe in the science. I used to try to sell people on the science, but like, don't even talk about the science. Just help them produce a positive result. That is what's going to be your biggest ally. Show more than tell. Yes, Tamsin.
Yeah. And Risha is wondering, how can one help put an effective system in place to ensure that the correct hats are being worn? I think your hat example was very illustrative.
Well, I think, first of all, people need to understand the hats, right? They need to understand what leadership is, and they don't. A lot of people think that it's positional authority, and that's why I wrote the book. Then they need to understand what a system is made up of. So I do a lot of the stuff that I talk about in this is a link to when I talk in front of school leaders, so they can see they have a vision, right? Because we have to, the first thing is you got to create a vision. This is an EO. We got to help people see how things are going to be better if they engage in behavior. So they have to see a path. A lot of times they don't, because being a school leader is very difficult. Being a teacher is very difficult. I have so much respect for good ones, honestly, and they don't. In America, unfortunately, they do not get the respect they deserve. And it is just very challenging. People think teaching is telling. Good teaching is not just about telling. It is so much more, man. Especially in these special needs classes where they have to engineer every second of the day. They are not getting paid enough, man. They are not getting respected enough. So there's so much, man. We should all be holding them. We should be bowing to them the way we bow to like black belts and senseis and all that stuff, because good ones are amazing.
Good ones are amazing, yeah. And Mickey wants to know, what kind of problems have you encountered that left you conceding that you don't have the resources to change things for the better?
Yeah,
Has that ever
so
happened?
great question, man. I wish I could say I've always been successful. So, and I put this in my book. I share my own vulnerabilities and like how I engage in ask clown behavior. Now, when I was out with a crew of people, right, changing schools around, and it was hard to get street cred when I wasn't, I didn't have the influence I have now. I didn't have the books and everything, but I was changing around schools. And so I decided to go in and become an assistant principal. I did not want to be an assistant principal. And of course, they dropped me into the alternative school first. And the first thing I did was get their major behaviors way down. And it was simple. I changed simple behaviors on the staff's part, like stop yelling at them publicly, right? Like they would be yelling at the kids from across the milieu. So it would be correcting students behaviorally and, just focusing on like greeting them in the morning. It was very simple things. And we had a drastic reduction in that. They never did this in the district before. They pulled me out of that school and dropped me in the most difficult school, and it wasn't that school, believe it or not. It was an elementary school that they had cops coming out there twice a week, and it was a mess. And within 2 months, the local and the state union came out and declared it a miracle. I'm like, it wasn't a miracle. It was organizational behavior management, right? And all the things I just talked about, this is things I did. So I went back to the district and I said, I want to do this. I want to help you guys do this in all schools, because it's about the systems and it's leadership, right? It's about having this chain that I'm talking about. And they said no. And I got pissed. And I ended up quitting. I ended up leaving the district certainly on, right? But I think that, you know what? I didn't do things like I was being invited to functions, and I wouldn't show up at their functions. I wouldn't show up at, the Friday night, whatever it was. Cause in my mind, I'm like, I'm not kissing their ass. I'm not going to, I'm not trying to move up in position, a hierarchy. I don't care about, honest to God, I don't care about the initials around your name. I don't care how much money you have, how much influence you have. What I do care about is how you treat people, right? And I'm going to treat you, if you're the most powerful person in the room, I'm going to judge you by how you're treating the person with least amount of power. And I saw a bunch of people engaging in behavior that was not aligned with my values. I didn't like it. But had I kept on my behavioral lens, had I not engaged in ask-on behavior, I could have thought, what do I need to do more or less differently? And I should have, for the good of the students, for the good of teachers, showed up at those events, established myself as more of a positive reinforcer, found out more about their values, their pain points, right? And begin to try to make a change from that level so I could make more system change. Now, I did make system change in the district, and some of the stuff that I've written about in some of my books, right? I did that, but I could have made more. I decided to leave, but I could have been different, because whatever I was doing, it wasn't working. So what do I need to do more or less or differently? And I have to establish myself as a positive reinforcer, which means I need to know what the reinforcers are. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the next two questions are sort of going really in that same direction, because basically Tamsin wants to know, how do you persuade really large organizations when you yourself have limited power. And Elizabeth wants to know, how do you work with really small teams? Say there's only two people plus yourself.
Yeah, great. So I think in both cases, you need to produce an outcome, right? So making large system change is very hard, but even large or small, focus on something small, make the change, shine the light on it, right? When you do that, then you can scale. So we got to make the change, right? So we're demonstrating proof of concept, so to speak. So we show them that this can be done. Now we do it in some other places. Like, for example, one of the things I did, I put together this thing called, it's in my quick response book, called Codes and the Quick Room, which I changed to Stop Room. So it was an alternative suspension. And it was a way for also when there was really bad data in schools, like they were relying on referral data, and referral data is relying on the behavior of individuals, teachers writing and inputting a referral. And that is very, very challenging to people, right? To do that, it gets high response effort when there's a lot of behavior challenges going on. And so I did it in a school, and then I found another principal that wanted to do. I did it in their school, and then I did it in one more school. And then the whole district said, what are you guys doing here? You're getting this reduction. And they adopted it across the whole district. So if you want to make big change, you need to start small, even with a smaller team, right? Start small, find some changes. If it's not, start with one classroom. It's in the classroom. Start with one transition. Start small, shine a light on it, help them see that you did it. Just make the change. Then you say, we can replicate this because we're doing it through behavior principles. And then you begin to grow it from that. So I love these questions. Great.
That's Paulie. That's all of our questions, and I can't believe the time is already. We've already run over a few minutes, and I really appreciate you being with us for that extra time.
Well, how many people did we have show up? I couldn't even see.
Well, it was. I don't know how many actually showed up, but we had just about 1,000 people registered, which is incredible.
Okay, cool, man.
So this is really cool. I thoroughly enjoyed your talk. I think there's lots of people saying we learned a lot, and I just have to have you back someday and learn some more from you. In the meantime, Paulie, thank you so much from the Centre of Behavior Analysis at Queen's.
Thanks for everybody for coming, guys.
And just wonderful talk, a wonderful presentation, and a resource for people. Lots of people will review this and go over it again. So
you're welcome, guys.
Thank you very much.
You.
And thanks everybody for turning up.
Bye, guys.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
See ya. Bye.